So Elizabeth's power, our first major topic area. So lots of the images that we've got of Elizabeth is a great use of glamour, dances, plays, feasts. She was certainly someone who used her image to give her great power, and her patronage was a way of maintaining this power. So nobles would compete against each other to get access to Elizabeth and build their own network. If you could say you knew Elizabeth, then this certainly would count in your favour. The access to Elizabeth, if you could get anywhere near her, the privy chamber, then you would be faced with her ladies in waiting, from whom Elizabeth expected absolute loyalty. We can see one example there of a finger being broken of one of the ladies in waiting who got married without permission. The closest group of advisors to Elizabeth were known as the Privy Council. There were about 19-20 of these. However, she only generally met about 7 or 8 of them at a time. She deliberately promoted opposing views so that she could come down on one side or the other and decide for herself. She often used her temper, fierce temper, to good effect. And she played this cleverly because she was very much associated with one of her leading members of the Privy Council, Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, but she never married him. So she was aware of the importance of staying neutral. The other people who were very important were her secretaries of state. First of all, there was William Cecil, then there was Francis Walsingham, and then he was followed again by William Cecil once again after his death. Both of them were from the gentry. They were lawyers. They were very clever. They both died of exhaustion, and they were both willing to do things with Elizabeth to tell her things that she didn't necessarily want to hear. The reverse side of this, and a sign of how Elizabeth's power dwindled towards the end of her reign, is with the Earl of Essex, who, after a failed attempt to stop a rebellion in Ireland, gave his supporters a lot of riches, and then, when he was rejected by the Queen, forced his way into the bedchamber, and was rebuffed by the Queen, and eventually he was stripped of his jobs, leaving him bankrupt. And there you go, there's an example of the patronage not working out for Earl of Essex. When he had very little choice, when he had no money, he rebelled, but it failed to gain enough support, and he was beheaded. So there's an example of the patronage system at work, first of all to lift him up, and then secondly to destroy him. Parliament was very different to the Parliament that we would see today. The MPs weren't elected, but they were chosen by the local lords and by the members of the Privy Council. It did have a say. It did persuade her to do certain things. For example, towards the end of her reign, Elizabeth was persuaded to end the monopolies that she'd been given to some supporters. She was praised in later time for her use of Parliament because, of course, the civil war that followed, and James and Charles weren't able to get control of Parliament in the same way Elizabeth was. She had an increasingly rebellious group of people, the Puritans. One example is John Stubbs wrote a pamphlet criticising the Queen for her proposed marriage to a French Catholic. Of course, you wouldn't like that. And he had his hands cut off along with William Page. There were also protests of people trying to get rid of bishops, but she was able to hold these protests off. But the very fact that there were protests shows that her power was dwindling towards the end of her reign. And there we go. There's your example there of the Puritans trying to get rid of bishops. 3 MPs arrested, and 1 Puritan MP was sent to the Tower of London and died 4 years later. 1601, Elizabeth had to give this what's called the Golden Speech, where basically she said she loved Parliament, she loved her people. She had to acknowledge that she needed to give wider control to more people. The speech was widely printed, and although it was all about her loving her country, it was perhaps another sign of her losing power. So Elizabeth kept power. That was how she kept power in Parliament. Around the country, she relied on her powerful noblemen as Lord Lieutenants. She had justices of the peace. Again, came from the well-educated gentry. They were often loyal to her, although we do have some examples of these, some of these being lazy and favouring powerful local families, for example, not taxing as much as they should do. Elizabeth went around the country each year on tours known as progresses. She'd speak to people, she'd stay at noblemen's houses, to huge expense they would have to do, and the entertainment was very lavish, as you can see at the bottom there, and often would cost the local lord a huge amount of money. She also continually got power by having these accession day pageants all over the country. There was great bonfires, great celebrating the fact that Elizabeth had come to the throne. She used the government control of the 60 printing presses to censor publications she didn't like, to publish publications against Catholic priests, and to publish favourable reviews. And you've got the example there, The Fairy Queen, which praised the Queen very much like Elizabeth. Elizabeth herself was a great fan of plays, and if a play was successful and she liked it, it would often appear in the theatres. She did very briefly shut down the theatres when they criticised the Queen, although plays that criticised the Pope and Philip II of Spain were very much tolerated and allowed, even encouraged, you might say. Her pictures would have been widespread. Certainly if you were in the household of Elizabeth, you would be expected to be bearing one of the miniatures of Elizabeth. Very carefully used her image to show her power, and we can see there the top image there is one of the armades. You can see Elizabeth, her hand on the globe. We've got the armade in the background, the ruff that she's wearing, her great jewels celebrate her wealth. And the bottom one there is the rainbow portrait. It's not easy for us to recognise, but just here we have Elizabeth holding a rainbow. She's also got what might be termed angel wings around her as well, suggesting she's from heaven. This is supposed to be a bread basket, which suggests that she's bringing great food and great wealth and happiness to her country. And if you look very carefully on her dress, you can see eyes and even some ears, suggesting she sees all and hears all, and the serpent suggests that she's very thoughtful, very tricky. She's very sneaky in what she's able to do as well. Great, suggesting that she's got wisdom. When people would go to church, that they would hear this positive message about Elizabeth. Every services, the worshippers would say the prayer for the Queen's Majesty. Thanksgivings were held every accession day, and there would be special sermons thanking God for having such a great Queen. And that's how the church is a vital way of getting